Amara was once the pride of her village. Born to Chief Nien, the leader of their peaceful community, she had always been destined for greatness. Her beauty, grace, and sharp mind made her admired by everyone. People often spoke of her wisdom, as she was just as capable of making decisions as any of the elders. The villagers would gather around her, listening to her stories and looking up to her, as if she were a living legend. Her presence was comforting, a sign of strength and hope, but that all changed when Amara fell ill. It started slowly. A faint weakness in her legs, which at first she brushed off as a minor problem. But soon, the symptoms grew worse, and her condition took a sharp turn for the worse. She could no longer stand on her own. Her legs refused to carry her, and even the simplest tasks became difficult to manage. What was once a promising young woman became someone whose body was betraying her. Her father, Chief Nyan, was devastated. As the head of their tribe, he had always been strong, both in body and spirit. But seeing his daughter in such pain, he felt helpless. He consulted the village healer, an elderly woman who had seen countless illnesses, but even she had no answers. Amara's condition baffled them. They tried every possible remedy, from herbal treatments to mystical rites. He even sought the wisdom of distant shamans, hoping they could bring back his daughter's strength. But nothing worked. As days turned to weeks, and weeks into months, her condition only grew worse. The villagers, once fond of Amara, began to change. They no longer greeted her with the same warmth. Whispers spread through the town like wildfire, and soon, there were rumors that her illness was a curse. She must have done something to anger the spirits, they would say. What if her disease spreads to others? The fear was palpable, and in the face of such whispers, the villagers began to distance themselves from the chief's daughter. They stopped visiting her, stopped speaking to her. At first, Amara tried to stay positive. She fought back against the loneliness that crept in, holding on to the hope that one day she would recover. But as the weeks passed, the isolation became unbearable. Her friends turned away from her, and her father, the one person she had always relied on, seemed more distant with each passing day. Chief Nyan, who had always been a strong, proud man, could not hide the shame he felt. The weight of his daughter's illness bore heavily on him, and soon, his once strong heart became cold with despair. One evening, after another failed attempt to find a cure for Amara, Chief Nyan came to a decision that would change everything. He gathered his closest advisors and spoke to them in hushed tones. "We cannot keep her here any longer. Her condition is bringing nothing but shame to our family. We must send her away." The advisors were shocked, but none dared to speak against the chief. They all understood the pressure he was under. Their leader was known for his wisdom, but even he had his limits. Amara, they believed, was a lost cause, and so the decision was made. The next day, Chief Nyan took his daughter to a small, secluded cabin at the edge of the village. It was a place rarely used, tucked away in the trees where no one would bother them. There, he left her alone. Amara could not believe what was happening. "Father, please, don't leave me here. I need you," she pleaded. But her father, his eyes hollow and distant, didn't respond. He simply turned away and walked out the door, leaving her behind. The silence that followed was deafening. Amara, once surrounded by love and admiration, was now alone. No longer the strong, confident woman she had been, she was now a prisoner of her own body and the loneliness that suffocated her. The cabin was small, cold, and dark, with only a few belongings to keep her company. There were no servants, no friends, and no visitors. The villagers, too afraid to come near her, kept their distance. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Amara's world became smaller with each passing day. The once vibrant young woman now spent her days staring out the small window of the cabin, watching the seasons change, unable to participate in the life that continued to move on without her. The village carried on with its work, its celebrations, and its daily activities. But Amara had become nothing more than a forgotten memory. She had tried to stay strong, telling herself that one day things would get better. But with each day that passed, that hope faded. She had been abandoned by her father, the man who had once promised to protect her. The villagers had turned their backs on her. She felt like an outcast, a person no longer worthy of love or attention. Her body, once a source of pride, had become her enemy, and her heart, once filled with dreams of a bright future, now felt heavy with grief. At night, Amara would lie in her small bed, her body aching from the constant struggle to move, to adjust, to find some comfort. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her, suffocating her. There was no escape from the pain, no one to comfort her, no one to tell her that it would all be okay. She was truly alone, and yet, in the stillness of the night, something stirred within her, a small spark of resistance. Amara refused to give up. She might have been abandoned, but she wasn't ready to surrender completely. She would find a way to survive, to live again, to prove that she was not weak, not a burden, and not someone to be forgotten. But the days went on, and as she sat by her window, watching the sun rise and set, Amara began to wonder if she would ever find the strength to break free from the loneliness that consumed her. Would she remain forgotten in the shadows of the village forever? Would she ever again see the faces of those who had once admired her? And, most importantly, would anyone ever come to her rescue? As the harsh winter winds began to howl outside her cabin, Amara clung to the faint hope that one day, someone might come. But for now, all she could do was wait. Wait for a change. Wait for a miracle. Little did she know, someone was coming. Someone who would change everything for her. It had been months since Amara was abandoned in the cabin. The cold winter had passed, and the trees were now beginning to bloom again as spring arrived. Still, Amara had not seen another soul. Her only company was the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional bird that would sing from a distant branch. Life had become a monotonous routine. Every day felt like the same, with Amara struggling to find a reason to get up, to do something other than sit by the window and stare into the vast, empty world outside. She had tried to make the best of her situation, spending her time reading, trying to write, and even drawing with what little supplies she could gather. But nothing could fill the aching emptiness in her heart. Though she had come to terms with the fact that the world around her had moved on without her, she could not ignore the small, persistent voice inside her that whispered, "You are not forgotten. You will rise again." That voice was a spark in the darkness, but it was barely enough to keep her going. What could she possibly do on her own, in this isolated cabin with her body so weak and paralyzed? And then, as if by some twist of fate, the winds of change were about to blow through her quiet, lonely life. It was a late afternoon when the sound of hooves reached Amara's ears. At first, she thought it was just the wind playing tricks on her, but then the sound grew louder, and it became clear that someone was riding towards the cabin. Her heart leaped, and she felt a sudden rush of hope. Could it be someone from the village? Could they have come to check on her? She immediately moved towards the door, her pulse quickening with anticipation. As the rider came closer, Amara could see him clearly for the first time. He was a tall man, dressed in a worn, brown coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. His horse was a strong, sturdy animal, moving gracefully along the narrow path that led to her cabin. The man rode with a quiet confidence, his posture relaxed but alert, as if he had been traveling for a long time and had learned how to navigate the world with minimal effort. When the man dismounted, Amara was surprised to see that he had no companion, no pack of supplies, and no need for a guide. He was alone in the world, a lone traveler passing through. His clothes were simple, but there was something about him that caught her attention. His face was weathered, his eyes dark but full of quiet strength. He was a man who had lived through hardships, and yet there was a calmness about him, a stillness that made it clear he did not seek attention or recognition. He didn't speak at first, simply tying his horse to a nearby post and glancing around. Amara, unsure of what to say or do, waited nervously. The man's eyes caught hers. And for a moment, neither of them moved. He studied her, not with pity, but with curiosity. As if he saw her for who she truly was, not the broken woman she had become, but the woman she still was, on the inside. Strong, proud, and resilient. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "I've heard of you. The chief's daughter. The one who was abandoned." Amara felt a sharp pang in her chest. She nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. "That's right," she said softly. "But there's no need to talk about it. There's nothing to say." The man didn't seem fazed by her response. Instead, he stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "I can see it in your eyes. You've been through a lot, but you're still here, and that means something." Amara was taken aback. No one had spoken to her like this in months. The villagers, when they still looked at her, did so with pity, as if she were nothing more than a tragedy to be forgotten. But this man, this stranger, saw something else in her, something more than her physical condition, something deeper that she herself had almost forgotten. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't offer any empty promises. Instead, he simply acknowledged her existence, the strength that still burned within her, even if it was barely visible to the outside world. It was strange, but it made her feel seen. "I've been traveling," the man continued, "for a long time. I don't know why I came here, but I think maybe I was meant to meet you." Amara, still unsure of this sudden visitor, stared at him in silence. She had no idea who he was or what his intentions were. But there was something about him that felt different, something that made her feel safe, even though she barely knew him. He smiled gently, as though sensing her hesitation. "I don't speak much," he said. "I'm not one for words, but I'm not here to talk. I'm here because I think you need someone. Someone who doesn't judge you. Someone who's willing to listen, even if it's just in silence." Amara was taken aback by the simplicity of his words. What did he mean by that? She had spent so many months in silence, in isolation, that she almost forgot what it meant to have someone there, truly there, with no expectations, no demands. Just someone who would sit with her, who wouldn't see her as a problem to be fixed. For the first time in a long time, Amara felt the weight on her chest lighten. She wasn't alone. She wasn't forgotten. There was someone here who, despite his silence, seemed to understand her better than anyone else had in months. The cowboy, as Amara soon came to think of him, stayed for a while, not saying much, but always present. He would come every day, bringing food, water, and firewood. He never made a big show of it. He simply did what needed to be done. There was no pity in his actions, no sympathy in his eyes. He didn't treat her like a fragile, broken woman. Instead, he treated her as if she were exactly who she was, a person worthy of respect, no matter her circumstances. At first, Amara didn't know how to respond. She had grown so accustomed to people avoiding her, to people seeing her only for her illness, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be treated as an equal. But Jack the cowboy wasn't like the others. He didn't care about her disability or her past. He cared only about who she was now, who she could be. Each day, Jack's visits grew longer. He would sit with her by the fire, listening to her if she spoke, or simply existing in the same space if she didn't. Sometimes, they would share a meal together, and although Jack didn't say much, there was a quiet understanding between them that words could never capture. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was enough. Amara began to look forward to his visits. For the first time in months, she felt less alone. The world outside her cabin still seemed distant, still harsh and cold. But Jack brought a warmth that slowly began to heal the fractures in her heart. She wasn't sure how long he would stay or why he had come, but for the first time in ages, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her life could be different. Maybe the loneliness she had felt for so long could be replaced with something else, something worth fighting for. Jack, the silent cowboy, had ridden into her life without a word of explanation. But in doing so, he had given her something priceless. The simple, profound gift of human connection. And that, more than anything else, was what she needed most. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, Amara began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't a loud, grand feeling, but rather a quiet, steady warmth that spread inside her. Jack's visits had become the highlight of her days. At first, she wasn't sure what to expect from him. He was a man of few words, someone who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, but in the silence between them, she began to see a kindness in his actions that spoke louder than anything words could say. Jack had a way of being present without demanding anything in return. He would arrive each day, his horse trotting slowly behind him as he made his way to the cabin. He never rushed, never seemed to be in a hurry. He moved with purpose but also with patience. He would bring food, firewood, and any other small supplies that might make Amara's life easier. His hands were always busy, fixing something around the cabin, tending to the small chores that needed attention, but he never spoke much. It wasn't because he didn't have anything to say. It was because he didn't need to. Amara could tell by the way he worked, by the way he smiled softly, that he simply wanted to make her life a little easier. Amara, for her part, had never been good at accepting help. She had always been independent, a woman who could do anything she set her mind to. But now, in this helpless state, with her body betraying her every day, she had to learn how to let go. It was hard at first. She had spent so many months feeling abandoned, rejected, and forgotten. To accept kindness, to allow someone else to take care of her, felt strange. But Jack's presence was different. There was no pity in his eyes, no sympathy that made her feel like a burden. He treated her like an equal, like a person who deserved respect, no matter her condition. Some days, when she felt particularly low, Jack would simply sit with her by the fire. He didn't ask her to talk, didn't try to pull her out of her sadness. He just sat quietly, his presence offering a comforting silence that made the world feel a little less heavy. Amara began to realize that she didn't always need to talk about her pain, her loneliness. Sometimes, just being with someone who understood without needing explanations was enough. As the days went by, Amara found herself becoming stronger, not just physically, but emotionally as well. She had always known that her body would never be the same, but she hadn't realized how deeply the abandonment had affected her spirit. The villagers' rejection, her father's decision to turn his back on her, had broken something inside her. It wasn't just her legs that had become weak. It was her belief in herself, her sense of worth. But Jack, in his quiet way, was helping her rebuild that. He wasn't trying to fix her, and he wasn't offering false hope. He was simply showing her that she could still find joy in the small things, in the moments of connection, and in the quiet companionship they shared. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky and painted the world in shades of orange and pink, Jack brought something new with him. It was a small wooden box, plain and simple. Amara looked at it curiously as he placed it on the table beside her. "What's this?" she asked, her voice soft. Jack glanced at her and gave a small smile. "Something to pass the time," he said, his voice as steady and calm as always. "Thought you might like to try." Amara opened the box, revealing a small set of paints, brushes, and a few sheets of parchment. At first, she didn't know what to say. She hadn't painted in years, not since she had been healthy, not since she could still move freely. She had forgotten what it felt like to hold a brush in her hand, to create something with her own two hands. But as she ran her fingers over the smooth wood of the box and the soft bristles of the brushes, a spark of excitement flickered in her chest. "I thought," Jack continued, his voice breaking the silence, "maybe you could use this time to create something. Paint, draw, whatever you like. Just something to remind you of who you are." For the first time in a long time, Amara felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had spent so many months feeling like she had lost herself, as if her life was defined by her paralysis. But Jack had reminded her that she was more than that. She was still Amara. She could still create, still find joy, still live. For the next few hours, Amara lost herself in the painting. It was nothing grand or spectacular, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was doing something that made her feel alive again. She painted a landscape of the village, the rolling hills, and the tall trees that had always been her home. The colors flowed easily onto the canvas, and for the first time in months, Amara felt a connection to the world around her. She wasn't an abandoned daughter. She wasn't a burden. She was a woman with a past, with dreams, with a future that was still hers to shape. Jack watched quietly from the corner, never interrupting, but his eyes never left her as she worked. There was something comforting about the way he allowed her space, yet always stayed near enough to let her know he was there if she needed him. It was a strange kind of peace, one that Amara had never known before. After that evening, painting became a part of her daily routine. Every day, after Jack's visit, she would sit by the window, her brushes in hand, and create. She painted the changing seasons, the sky shifting from blue to gold to purple. She painted the simple beauty of the world she had once taken for granted, and with each stroke, she felt herself healing, not just physically, but emotionally. She was reconnecting with the woman she had always been. The woman who loved beauty, who loved life, who had so much to give. As the weeks turned into months, Jack's presence continued to be a steady comfort. He never pushed her, never asked for anything in return. He simply gave, quietly and without expectation. His actions spoke louder than words ever could. He helped her in ways she had never imagined. Not by fixing her or trying to change her, but by simply showing her that she could still live, that she could still have a future, even if it wasn't the one she had once envisioned. One afternoon, as Amara worked on a new painting, Jack spoke again, his voice soft but firm. "You know," he said, "you're stronger than you think." Amara looked up at him, her brow furrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" Jack met her gaze, his eyes steady. "I see it every day. You're still here, aren't you? You've been through so much, and yet you're still standing. That's strength. More strength than anyone could ever give you. You've got everything you need right inside you." Amara felt a lump rise in her throat as she looked at him. She had never realized it before, but Jack was right. She had always been strong, even when she didn't believe it herself. She had been through so much, and yet, here she was, still fighting, still surviving, still living. For the first time in months, Amara smiled. It was a small smile, but it was full of gratitude and understanding. Jack had given her a gift that went beyond anything material. He had reminded her of her own strength, her own worth, and that was more than enough. The seasons continued to change, as they always did, but for Amara, time felt different now. Her days, once filled with isolation and despair, had shifted into something more meaningful. The gentle rhythm of Jack's visits, his quiet companionship, and the small joys she had found in painting had transformed her life. Slowly but surely, Amara was rediscovering herself, piece by piece. Just as the earth outside her cabin was waking up from the winter's sleep, Jack's presence in her life had become a quiet anchor. He never asked for anything in return. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He never tried to force anything. He never pushed her to do more than she was able to. Instead, he gave her the space to heal at her own pace, while always showing her that she was worthy of being seen, of being cared for. One afternoon, after a long day of painting, Amara sat by the window, looking out at the fields that stretched before her. The light from the setting sun was soft and golden, casting long shadows across the land. It was the kind of moment that used to fill her heart with joy, before everything changed. But now, as she looked at the world through the window, she felt something different. She felt connected to it once again. The world was no longer an enemy, no longer a place that had abandoned her. It was a place full of beauty, and it was still hers to live in. Jack had been standing nearby, as he often did, watching her. There was something about him that made her feel safe, as if he understood her in a way no one else could. She turned to him, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with more emotion than she had expected. Jack gave her a small, silent nod. He didn't speak, but his eyes softened. And in that moment, she knew exactly what he meant. It was enough for her to know that he understood. The gratitude she felt was overwhelming. Jack had given her a gift that was more valuable than any material thing. The chance to live again, to rediscover herself, to find a purpose. As the days passed, Amara's strength grew, not just in her body, but in her spirit. Her hands, which had once struggled to hold a paintbrush, now moved with confidence, creating scenes of beauty on the canvas. She painted the world around her, each flower, each tree, each blade of grass that she had once taken for granted. And with each stroke, she was healing. She was becoming whole again. It wasn't about returning to the woman she had been before her illness. It was about accepting who she was now, in this moment, and finding peace with that. But Amara knew that healing wasn't just about the physical recovery. It was about the heart, too. She had spent so much time in loneliness, so much time in silence, that she had forgotten what it was like to connect with others, to feel loved and understood. Jack had been the first person in months to treat her like she was more than her illness, more than her disability. He had never seen her as broken. He had never pitied her. He had simply seen her, and in doing so, he had helped her see herself again. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Jack finally spoke more than just a few words. He looked at her with the same quiet intensity that had always made her feel understood. But this time, there was something else in his gaze. "You've changed," he said, his voice low but filled with a kind of certainty that made Amara pause. "I can see it in your eyes. You've come a long way from the woman I first met." Amara looked down at her hands, unsure of what to say. Her emotions felt too big to express in words. She had come so far, but it was hard to put into words what this journey had meant to her. But she knew, in that moment, that Jack was right. She had changed. She had fought to hold on to herself, to find her strength in a world that had once seemed so empty. She had fought to rediscover the woman who was still inside, waiting to rise again. And now, she had. "I've learned something from you," she said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. "Not just how to paint again, or how to live without fear, but how to see myself differently. I wasn't broken, Jack. I was just lost." Jack didn't respond immediately, but Amara could tell that her words had reached him. His quiet strength, his steady presence, had made all the difference in her life. He had been the steady hand that had pulled her from the depths of despair and into the light of possibility. Days turned into weeks, and as the seasons changed once more, Amara felt herself growing stronger, more confident. She had found a sense of peace that she hadn't thought possible. The village, which had once abandoned her, seemed less important now. Her father's rejection, though painful, no longer defined her. She had come to realize that she didn't need their approval, their love, or their acceptance. She only needed to accept herself, and with Jack's help, she had learned how to do that. Then, one day, word spread throughout the village. People began to talk about the chief's daughter, the one who had been abandoned and forgotten. They whispered about how she had been seen again, how she was painting, how she had come alive in ways they hadn't expected. Amara knew that the villagers were curious, but she didn't feel the need to confront them. She didn't need their forgiveness or their understanding. She had already forgiven herself. But there was one person who had heard these whispers and felt a stirring of guilt in his heart: the chief, Amara's father. He had watched from a distance as his daughter had healed, as she had found her strength again. He had heard the rumors of her paintings, of how she was living again. And a part of him, the part he had tried to bury, began to question his decision to abandon her. It wasn't long before Chief Nyan came to the cabin, his face a mixture of pride and shame. He stood at the door for a long time, watching Amara as she worked, her paintbrush moving smoothly across the canvas. She didn't notice him at first, lost in her work. But when she finally looked up, she saw him standing there. Her heart skipped a beat, but she didn't move. The silence between them was thick with years of pain and unspoken words. Amara waited, unsure of what her father would say, unsure of how to feel about him now. After all, he had abandoned her, left her alone in the cabin without a second thought. But now, he was standing here, looking at her like he had just realized something important. "I've been wrong," Chief Nien finally said, his voice thick with regret. "I should never have left you. I was ashamed, but I shouldn't have turned my back on you. I see now that you're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." Amara looked at him for a long moment, her emotions swirling inside her. She had spent so much time resenting him, so much time wishing he had been there for her when she needed him the most. But in that moment, she realized something. His apology, though long overdue, wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that she had already forgiven him. She had already moved on. "I don't need your forgiveness," she said quietly. "But thank you for saying that. I've forgiven you long ago. I had to, in order to find peace within myself." Chief Nien's eyes softened, and he nodded slowly. "I understand," he said, his voice filled with the weight of his words. "I can't change the past, but I can try to be part of your future, if you'll let me." Amara looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "You've already given me something better than you realize," she said. "You gave me the chance to live again, and that's enough." With those words, the healing was complete. Amara had found her strength, her voice, and her peace. She no longer needed the approval of others. She had everything she needed right inside herself. Jack had helped her see that. And now, with her father's apology, Amara knew that she was finally free. As the sun set over the hills, Amara sat back down at her canvas, Jack beside her. Together, they watched the world outside, knowing that no matter what had happened in the past, they had each other, and that was all that mattered now.